live. Good morning, everyone. Just give me 1 second and I will get the comments up so I can read them. Let me see. How's everyone this morning? Anybody got enjoying any drinks yet or anything? And how's everyone in Australia? Anybody got any sore heads in Australia this morning? And let me see now. There we go. I don't know. I should be able to see the comments now. Can you all hear me and stuff? A little bit of lagging going on there. Not sure how slow the lagging is. The lagging could be about 10 seconds slow. Unless you guys can't hear me. Then there's just serious problems. That's good to hear. Right, all set up for the Scottish clothing of the 15th century. Loud and clear, happy days. Oh my god. I wasn't drinking at all last night and I woke up just a few minutes, what was it, an hour ago to set this all up. And I was drinking coffee with the wife for a good chunk of yesterday, and I woke up there and I feel like I'm hungover and stuff, and I didn't drink any alcohol, I swear, like. What kind of whiskey do you have going? No, my wife literally will not jump in front of the camera for the life of her. You will never see her go in front of the camera. Oh my god. Now I'm drinking water again. It must be all the caffeine is dehydrating me. Oh, nice. Yeah, Kilty. I'm sure I've tasted that whiskey before. I think it's quite delicious. If I remember. I remember Aldi. What was it, back in 2014? They were doing a special Clontarf edition for the anniversary of the Battle of Clontarf, and that was amazing. Weirdly enough, I really liked that one, and that was Aldi were doing that one. It was really, really good, which is unusual for Aldi to do whiskey that good. Like, I'm on water from yesterday, and I was just drinking coffee. It's so weird. I literally woke up a few seconds ago, and I feel like I was hungover. Not the worst, but still like. Oh yeah, got Jameson's. I think I have a bottle over there, but it's empty of Jameson's. So I got no actual fresh Jameson's. I'm a horrible sinner. I like mixing Jameson's with pretty much anything. Like, where let me see. Right, what time is it now? 10 past. Got the old what was it? Myths about 15th century Scottish clothing. Obviously, you all know that Braveheart is a real movie. Everything that happened in Braveheart obviously is factual. Um, you all know this, right? At this point, like you should clearly know from all the YouTube videos that everything that's in Braveheart the movie, it's all fact. There's not a single thing in there that is fiction. Japanese whiskey is more like Scottish whiskey, where it's got that smoky taste. I wouldn't be the most biggest specialized in Japanese whiskey now, but yeah, from my opinion, it's very similar to how the Scots have it and stuff. But I know a lot of Japanese people that are really into Scottish whiskey over Irish whiskey, like, where I definitely would prefer Irish whiskey or American whiskey. You've got Braveheart going right now. Yeah, on RT2. No way. I can't remember it was ever playing on RT2. I know everybody who was involved with RT and stuff worked with the set with Braveheart. My uncle was on Braveheart, and I've got a lot of friends and stuff that was on Braveheart as well. Yes. I swear, Scottish people they actually wore kilts at this period. That's fact. It wasn't until what was it? A lot of people would tell you lies that it wasn't until the about the Jacobite what was it? The William Knight Jacobite Wars in the 17th century that people started wearing kilts and stuff. But that's a fact. That's all a lie. I remember when I was 5 years of age, and Mel Gibson told me himself that people wore kilts in the 13th century, not the what was it, the 17th and 18th century. Yeah, that's a fact. With the William Knight Jacobite Wars, that's where many people will tell you that that's when we start to wear the great kilt. But no, that's all lies. It's the 13th century, and it's a mini skirt. It's more like a mini skirt, and that's worn in the 13th century. That's a fact, by the way. Historical fact. You can look it up for yourself. Yeah, I'm Wayne. I'm exactly the same as well. I prefer Irish whiskey over Scottish whiskey. I think Irish whiskey is a full job, where I find Scottish whiskey's kind of only half of the job done. Um, where are we on the make believe list? Clan specific tartans, which pop up in the Victorian period, they tell you. Most people will tell you that it's in the Victorian period that we get clan Pacific tartans. When in fact, once again, I do believe all of this is a lie. We can see this in the Braveheart movie, that once again, Pacific clans get Pacific tartans. So once again, that's a complete lie. That is in the Victorian period around 1814, that this whole idea of clan Pacific tartans start to come in. No, as Mel Gibson has told me himself, it's actually in the 13th century, going into the Scottish War of Independence, that people get Pacific clan tartans, not during the Victorian period. That's a lie. What about would been Braveheart is that period? Oh, I don't understand that one. I think to say there were no clan tartans, not that they were didn't wear kilts. Do, 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 do. They had the Great Kilt all right, but the Great Kilt doesn't pop up historically until about the 15th century, and the Great Kilt is a much more bigger what was it, cloak. Where was I with the whole thing? Highlands and Lowlands just identically. Give me a second there, because I was going to go on about tartans, because this is the oldest tartan we have right now found in Scotland, but it was obviously we're going to find way more, because this is a find. If you look at this one here on the center, that's actually a Spanish find. This is an Italian one. The very first one is an Italian find. This is an illustration from what is called at the time Iberia, which is modern day Spain. This is an Irish find. If you look at the pants here, the trawls as they call them, you can see tartan again, and then here you actually have a cloak. And so cloaks were much more common at the period. Let me flick ahead there, and I can show you most of the cloaks that people would have worn, especially during the Lowlands time. Give me a quick second, because I barred this with cloaks. There we go. This is the most common cloak that people would have worn in the 15th century, that we're talking about today. And they would have had tartans. If you look at the Dutch find, this is the same period, by the way. The last one here is the same period, and that's a Dutch find from a Dutch illustration. And you can see here that that's tartan, but not the same kind of tartan that we would have during the Victorian period. But that's kind of the tartan they would have had at the time, and it would have been more or less the commoners that would have had tartan. It's not until it appears that maybe it's around the 15th century that it starts to get more popular again, for people to have more tartan. So from our understanding, it seems to stay around the common area that we do see tartan, and it's not specifically to Scotland alone. It seems to just appear in literature, just haphazard. throughout the entirety of the medieval period, and we also just have haphazard finds all over Europe throughout the entirety of the medieval period as well. But getting back to the whole grey kilt thing, the grey kilt doesn't really start to appear until the 15th century, but what it is it's just a much more bigger cloak. So that's not to say people weren't making bigger cloaks before the the late 15th century, the 16th century, where we see the great kilt with the red shanks. So if you're looking into the great kilt that eventually becomes the kilt and what the kilt is based on, you want to look at the red shanks from my interpretation of what's going on and stuff. So there is kilts, especially around the late 15th century, 16th century. But the kilt that we know today doesn't really appear until about the 19th century, going into the 1800s. So I think it's down to if you want to argue if there is great kilts around the 15th century or not. I think it's it's a funny one, it's the same argument of sandwich, although we have people saying that there's the sandwich around the the 1800s or so. All sandwiches is people stuffing bread into a bun and eating it. So people clearly could have done that before the invention of the sandwich, and it's the same thing with a much more bigger cloak to put on. If we actually even look at Ireland, we have what they call the brat. Let's flick down here. Bum, bum, bum. Oh yeah, there it is. So we have the brat here, and that was common in Ireland at the time. And sure, once again, that all that is a much more bigger, much more comfier cloak to put on. So if you want to make the argument that the kilt was there before the 16th century, I'm not saying the kilt, obviously the great kilt, the much more bigger cloak that can be wrapped around, that's a fair argument to make, but it's trying to find solid evidence to back that up then, of course. Let me jump back to where I was. Highland and Lowland dress was identical. Once again, that's a myth that pops up during the Braveheart period. Let me pop over. Just want to recommend Philip, Irish Medieval History's Patreon. Oh, thanks for that, Dennis. Yeah, I'm doing classes, tomorrow, with a few people, alright. And that's about 20 quid. If anyone wants to jump in, all it is basic Irish medieval history. So if you're finding most of the stuff, a lot of people are coming up to me saying that they're finding it difficult to keep up a lot of the times with the conversations that's going on. So I'm kind of running classes that are going between 4:10 all the way to 16:03, and I'm running those classes pretty much every weekend on a Sunday. Right now we're just on the start of it. We're just on the start of the early medieval period. So if anybody wants to jump over to that Patreon, it should be just on the channel itself, and jump on to do some classes and stuff, just really basic Irish medieval classes. Would attire have differed between the Lowlands, Highlands, Hebrides, Orkneys and Stratland? Yeah, so let me see. So obviously there is a massive difference between the Lowlands and the Highlands. If we jump over here, we can see this is, if we're dealing, it mostly depends on what period you're talking about, because obviously, as we know yourself, going from the 60s all the way up to 2024, there's a change in clothes is changing. And at the time, if you're talking about Edinburgh and the Stuarts right now are hanging out with the French, they're hanging out in Paris. So guess what? People who live in Edinburgh who are going over to the court in Paris, they want to dress like the French in Paris. And the people in Paris are also copying the Burgundy fashion. So when they're going back to Edinburgh, they want to continue dressing this way because that's the latest fashion. So if you look at here, at the presentation here, this is what they're wearing in the courts in Paris. So when they're going back to Edinburgh, this is how they're dressing. If we can go into further details and stuff. So that's more photos of more 15th century clothing that would have been hip-hopped in the courts in Europe and would have been worn in Edinburgh. Once again, you're talking about tunics, doublets, what you see here with the doublet, and then underneath that is the tunic, and then we've got the trawls underneath then. But it's also the same in the Highlands as well. If we look at Highland clothing, in the Highlands then, first and foremost, a lot of people, when I was doing research for this, let me have a quick look at the comment section, see if there's anything going on. When did long pants go out? Long pants? If you're talking about these, are you talking about trawls or long pants? What was it? The breeches. The hose and breeches, or we have trawls that we have here. You're probably talking about trawls. Don't think either one of them really. Because if you're talking about the breeches and hose, I'm not quite sure about the breeches and hose. I think in Ireland, we start to phase it out in the 16th century, and we start to switch over to more trawls, which is more of this one, which is just kind of the regular pants. The problem with these trawls is that they kind of split in the middle when you're running around and stuff, and that's why people prefer the hose and breeches, from what, you know, my opinion and stuff. Obviously, if anybody wants to correct me on that one, you're more than welcome to do so. Please use sources as well if you're correcting me, so that way I can actually learn from where I'm going wrong. Where was I? Oh yeah, we're talking about the Highlands. When I was doing research for this, a lot of people were saying that everyone in the Highlands were wearing lena, and that's actually a misconception. The only people who are wearing lena, which is this saffron tunic, are actually the elite warrior class, not low-end warrior classes, but high-end warrior classes, and that's because they need to get a hold of this saffron dye. And on top of that as well, a lot of people assume in the 16th century people are still wearing the same fashion of tunic, which is the same fashion of the 16th century, which is this kind of long, there's kind of a long sleeve tunic that's in the 16th century. So a lot of people assume that there's a long sleeve tunic that's in the 16th century. But I've never found an actual effigy from that period in the 15th century that had a long sleeve tunic that everyone's assuming is around. What I'm actually seeing is actually a tight tunic of this period. If I look at all the effigies and stuff, the reason why I do believe it's also tight is because in that period there's way more conservative warfare going on, meaning that the elite warrior class, the high Gaelic warrior class that are wearing the saffron lena, they have to throw it onto their gaminsons, and then they have to throw on a gaminson, which is a woolly padded armor, and then on top of that they have to put the riveted mail on, which is a iron mail, so they have to put that on underneath their gaminson. And that means if they have a long sleeve tunic, that's going to get in the way of all that. So in that period it seems to be more conservative fighting, and if they're putting armor on top, they need to get this stuff out of the way, and that's the same for both the, I'm not quite sure about the Kerns. I haven't come across any solid evidence of them wearing armor, but there's a good chance that they were, because they're heavily involved with conservative fighting in both France and obviously back home in Ireland and over in Scotland as well. And the Gallowglass are definitely wearing more tighter saffron lena shirts, the lena itself, in this period as well. And they don't want the excess fabric getting in the way, from what I can see in the effigies and stuff. So in the 15th century, going from a lot of conservative fighting from the 100 Years' War, and then there's a small break in between, and then we go into the Wars of the Roses. A lot of these Gallowglass and Kerns seem to want to have much more tighter lenas on for much more conservative fighting in these big long battles and stuff, and to have the option of being able to put armor over on top, from my interpretation. And then what do you mean by conservative fighting? Conservative warfare. So in Ireland, we have two types of warfare. We have cattle warfare, cattle raiding, or cattle raiding warfare, or we have conservative warfare. So cattle raiding is basically when one group goes out to go and rob cattle and bring it back to its settlement, and another group has to go over and defend the cattle. So that's cattle raiding, and that's very common in Ireland, especially in the 16th century during the Tudor conquest of Ireland. However, in the 15th century, it seems that there's much more conservative fighting going on. And what conservative fighting is when you get two lines of men going from 10 men all the way up to 120 men, even sometimes 1,000 men. And they make two lines, two opposing lines, mostly made of spears and sometimes pikes. In Scotland, or they have mostly pikes, and then in Ireland they have spears. They make a line, they put their shields together to defend themselves, and then they go against each other and they start trying to murder each other in spear walls. And that's more conservative fighting. And in top of that, then you've got professional soldiers on both sides. In Ireland, we have the Gaelic mercenaries, and in Italy, then they have Italian mercenaries, and they have more specialized jobs within these line formations. So for the Gallowglass, who were hired up in the Hebrides, Ireland and Scotland, the job of the Gallowglass, they were mostly armed with axes, and they would have used their axes to chop at the spears and also break at the shields. And he also had various other jobs to try to kind of smash into the shield wall and stuff of the opposing side. And then you would have had kerns that would have gone in and harassed the kind of sides of the conservative fighting. I'll have to do a whole PowerPoint on this because I could talk for ages about the different tactics and styles of warfare. But it's basically you get two lines of men and they try to murder each other with spears and poke each other to death. That's pretty much what conservative fighting is. But the thing about cattle raiding is it's more or less light warfare, a lot of running around, a lot of kind of harassing and moving the cattle around before the enemy can come in and harass them. And then line fighting, a lot of armor on, much more different kind of fighting. So that's pretty much the difference between cattle raiding and conservative fighting. But my point being, if there's more conservative fighting going on, as in line on line formation, and they have to put armor on to fight, you would have had much more tighter clothing that you can see here. Compared to in the 16th century, in my opinion, and you're only going off my opinion really, and obviously people have different opinions on how the liner should be worn in the 15th and 16th century. Let's see what else we have in here. Tartan was found in China. Yeah, there's loads of tartan finds pretty much all over the place, and that was the same all over Europe as well. As I was saying earlier, you can literally find, this was found in Italy, this was found in Spain, which at the time was called the Iberian Peninsula. This is found in Ireland, close to us, and this is found in the Dutch counties in the modern day Netherlands. So we can find all tartan finds pretty much all over the world. So there's no surprise that you would have found that in China as well. Go the Kerns. Yeah, for anyone who doesn't know, basically in Irish warfare, you basically had the Gallowglass. I actually have the effigy here. Let me see. I had effigies a few seconds ago on the Lena. There we go. So that's a Gallowglass, and he's basically much more heavier infantry, so he'd wear the padded and mail on top, and his job is to hold the line if there's conservative fighting, and also if they're doing cattle raiding, he has to defend the kern while they try to rob the cattle. And then the kerns themselves with the light infantry, their job would have been to rob the cattle, or if they're talking about conservative fighting, harass the lines. And they were professional soldiers. A lot of people think that Gallowglass and Kerns are very cheap soldiers and very low class soldiers. They're not. They're high level professional soldiers. So they were highly skilled in what they did, even if it was just robbing cattle and stuff. Does sound funny in this day and age to have people that were professionals at robbing cattle, but you know, it is what it is. That's how Irish warfare was in the medieval period. My mother was Irish. Her surname was... Oh, do I know any of them? God, I think they mostly hang around up in the north, if I'm mistaken. Obviously, Michael, you can correct me on that one, but I'm pretty sure they're mostly up in the north. The ones I know anyway are up in the north. Yeah, the Indo-European shot that went to China. I forgot the name of them. Yeah, I think I do know of that as well. The Chinese find as well. Um, yeah, people got around the place. The earliest find we can think of in Tartan, I think, is up in the Bronze Age, and I think it's, if not, there's probably one from like what people refer to as the Stone Age and stuff. Can't remember specifically the actual academic name of the period itself, where they have the earliest find of tartan, but tartan goes way back to like the start of man and stuff, way up in the north, with the earliest pants and stuff. Like I think one of the earliest finds of pants in the world is up in the north, and it has tartan in it, I'm sure. Philip, did you take a look at the Scotland's 1555 Battle of the Shirts? No, haven't. Which battle is that, Ryan? I didn't look for this week's research. I didn't touch too much on the 16th century. I was very much fixed on what was going on in the 15th century when I was studying this. But God, when you go into the 16th century, there's so much information that suddenly explodes out. But I didn't. Let me have a quick look to see what stuff I was looking at for the 16th century. Obviously, I got these lads. I had these lads at the very end and stuff. But I think that's oh yeah, 1538. So that's actually quite early. It's not too bad actually. And that was the French. It was a French man who went and documented all these pictures and stuff from 1538. But I didn't do the one from that battle. Thomas Francis. Yeah. He's up in Waterford actually. You're right. You're not related to him, are you? Because, Jesus, that would be absolutely amazing. Did the Gallowglass come from the Scottish borders? Good. Now you're going into debate. The thing about the Gallowglass, though, is that they're there just with the arrival of the Scandinavians into the Hebrides and Orkney Islands, and into obviously a bit of the west side of it. Let me jump over to my picture of the Gallowglass again. Yeah, the when you're talking about the 15th century and we're talking about clothing, just to quickly answer that one, is that the Gallowglass at that period would have been more of the Gaelic clothing, so they're part of more of the Gaelic world. And when they first arrived, they're pretty much in between they're Gaul Gael at the very start, and they arrive into the Hebrides and the Orkneys around the 9th century. And they kind of go between raiding and stuff, and obviously doing the mercenary work with the Kingdom of Dublin at that point. Obviously, they're part of the Battle of Clontarf and stuff, and then they continue doing. They're mostly of the very start. They're loyal to the Kingdom of Norway, but they go between as well with marriage alliances and stuff. But for the most part, they're mostly loyal with the Kingdom of Norway until the Scottish-Norwegian War. When the Kingdom of the Scots at the time, who were mostly, I'm probably obviously up for correction on this one, but they're mostly focused around the Edinburgh area, the Kingdom of the Scots at the time, because Scotland isn't unified yet in the 13th century. It's not until about the later 13th century, after the Scottish-Norwegian War and then going into the Scottish War and independence, that we have a kind of sort of a much more unified Scotland, but not the Scotland that we obviously know today. But during the Scottish-Norwegian War, they're forcing the kind of, I suppose, the area that we would call Scotland today, the nobles that were in that area of West Scotland and North Scotland, who were loyal to the Kingdom of Norway. He was trying to force them to be loyal to the Kingdom of Scotland. So there's a big war. Scotland ends up winning, obviously, and they push the Norwegians out of it. The King of Scotland has to get involved. He's beaten back, and what happens then is that a lot of those families who were Gallowglass, one of the biggest families of all was the McSweeneys. The McSweeneys got 100% pushed out of it, and so the McSweeneys were first into mercenary work, and that's where they're referred to as the Gallowglass mercenaries. and they set up the first Gaelic mercenary companies in Ireland in the 13th century, and they get involved with the Brian O'Neill's Revolt and the Tamad Wars. And then obviously they go from those wars into the Scottish War of Independence. Once again, they're being hired as mercenaries throughout that whole period, especially when you have the Bruce's invasion of Ireland, when Edward the Bruce, Robert the Bruce's brother, is invited in as King of Ireland to take it over from the English, who were just making a bollocks of everything at the time. So yeah, that's who the Gallowglass are, and because they're getting more and more hired into Gaelic societies, especially Gaelic societies both in Ireland and in Scotland, but they're also getting hired in with the Scottish Lowlanders as well. So it's not like they're not a part of the Scottish Lowland Society; they are. But when it comes down to the culture side of things and the people that kind of hang around with when they're young, it's mostly Gaelic people. So obviously then they end up taking more Gaelic culture. So going between the 13th century to the 16th century, by the time even when you get to the 15th century, they're pretty much 100% speaking Gaelic and also dressing 100% Gaelic. So you would have seen them have the Lena and various other kind of Irish warrior customs and stuff. Let me see what else we have here. Oh yeah, the MacDonald's. Yeah, I kind of want to get specialists in to talk about the McDonald's, because the thing about the McDonald's and the McLeods is they're outside of my specialist region. Because I mostly specialize in, right now for the time being, I've mostly fixed on Irish warfare around the 15th century. That's why I've done most of my reading and research right now. So I don't specialize in Scottish warfare. I have been doing reading on Scottish warfare, but there's still a lot of bits I'm tripping up on. So I feel more comfortable if I get specialists in to talk about it. So I am in contact with people who specialize more in Scottish warfare of that period, which is pretty much MacLeod's and the MacDonald's. So I'll have somebody in to talk about the MacDonald's and stuff. So for the time being, I won't make too much a comment about the McDonald's and the Gallowglass in that whole region and stuff, but I will get somebody in to talk about that. Hopefully either this week or the week after, or the week after that. We'll see what kind of schedule I can get there. There was a branch important marriage between the O'Neills and the the MacLeods and such. I actually haven't heard about that one. I am aware of other arranged marriages between various Gallowglass clans and famous Irish clans and stuff, but I haven't heard about the O'Neill and the MacLeod one. If you have a source for that, definitely send that on to me, because I'll be after that one. Alright, I haven't seen that one. It makes me think of the birth and beginning of the Duncan about crushing. Oh right. I haven't heard about that one. Jeez, you're pulling out a lot of ones I haven't heard of. But I suppose that's more on the Scottish side. That's probably why I haven't come across those sources. That's you just subscribed. Oh, thank you. Thanks very much there, Michael. The way before, though, that North Sea stuff was going on a long time ago. Yeah, and there's even people that argue, if you're talking about the connection with the North Sea, like, it's complicated, because it's not like it just ends as well. Like, people like start this whole North Sea connection with the Viking Age, and there's so many people that can counter it by having finds in the literature about raids happening in the North Sea, which is kind of like the Scottish, Irish area, Iceland, Norway and Denmark. People say the Viking Age started in 793 or 795, depending on which history book you're reading. But people kind of mark that's the start of the Viking Age, and they can already find Viking raids happening before then. And then after that as well, you also have trading going on as well between Scandinavia, Ireland and Scotland before the Viking Age. But for Ireland, Claire Downham still argues the Viking Age in our interpretation now in 2025 is pretty much the starting of heavy raiding that's happening in the coastal region of Ireland. That brings an end to the golden age of saints and scholars, because we have obviously all the monks are out in the coastal areas, and all of them are massively hit at the start of the Viking Age. So it does bring an end to the Golden Age of Ireland, even if raiding isn't anything new. And then on top of that, when we go into the second stage of the Viking Age, which happens around 912, we're going into an economic golden age that happens in Dublin. So that's pretty much how we perceive the golden, which is pretty much the Eamers. The Eamers take over Dublin. They beat Niall Glundov, who was the king of the Northern Nail, who became over king of the Nail at the time, who's pretty much over king of Ireland, except for the fact that Munster won't give them cattle tribute and stuff, but that's mad politics in Ireland. But basically, the over king of Ireland is beaten by the Irish Vikings in around 918 with the Battle of Isle Bridge. And they then, it's not like the Irish Vikings take over the country as well. What happens is that they put in place they kind of help the Southern Nail take over kingship, and then on top of that, then the Irish Vikings give tribute to the Southern Nail. So they still play politics internally, but externally, then they focus over, the Irish Vikings focus to take back the north of England, and then they spend years at war with the south of England, and then they only go in to aid the Southern Nail against the Northern Nail, and also the Munster branches as well. So politics is complicated in Ireland internally, but externally over in England, they're involved fighting and stuff. So that whole area, the history is quite complicated. And on top of that as well, even when we say that the Viking Age came to an end around 1014, the raiding still continues. The only thing is that it's kind of the end of the kind of economic golden age that was happening in Dublin after the Battle of Clontarf, which a lot of people argue came to an end in 980 with the Battle of Tara. It's all funny. And then some people then would argue that the Viking Age doesn't really end until that kind of Scottish-Norwegian war happens around, I think 1258 is allegedly when the Scottish-Norwegian War came to an end, which some people would argue is the end of the Viking Age and stuff, and end of trade between Norway and Ireland and Scotland and stuff, but it doesn't. It continues going even after that. So yeah, there's a lot going on. Describing in description of the power of the Irishman. What do you mean by that? By the description of the power of the Irishman? What is meant by the I'd have to look that up. I'm actually unaware of that source, Bones. The honey shield. I have to really look that one up. I'll look that up for you and I'll get back to you. I'll probably make a short on that one, because I'm not quite sure what that one means as well. I'd guess raiding skilled raiders. Yeah. Mounted raiders. Yeah, I could imagine as well. Because obviously when it comes down to mounted raiders, God, we have so much there. Because if you're unaware, in Ireland and Scotland we have the hobbler horse, which I'm sure, obviously you guys can correct me again, but I'm sure the hobbler horse is unique to Ireland and Scotland, and when I say Scotland, it's kind of blurred with England at the time as well, because you have the border ravers. If you guys are unaware, from the Scottish War, well, even before then, I think beforehand, Newcastle kind of was the area that was kind of the border between, where Newcastle is today, was kind of the border between Scotland and England before the Scottish War of Independence. But then during the Scottish War of Independence, all the way to 1603, what happens is that the border becomes a blur, because we're now at war between Scotland and England. The border becomes a blur, and the families who live in that area become very radically clannish against each other, as in they're constantly having clan wars with each other, but then they're making these alliances with each other, and they don't consider, obviously I'm up for correction on this, but they don't consider themselves really English or Scottish. They consider themselves kind of, from a modern interpretation, kind of Anglo-Scottish, and they're ultimately referred to as the border reavers, which is really, really fascinating history. And in that area, the hobbler horse is really, really popular for raiding between both Scotland and England. Like, these people don't have an alliance with either Scotland nor England. And when I say Scotland, I mean the Stuarts, and then when I mean England, I mean the Plantagenets, and then later on the the Lannisters. Um, no, not Lannisters, Lancastrians. I'm getting mixed up with Game of Thrones. Um, because obviously inside, talking about the medieval period, people, the barons themselves switch sides between all the noble families and stuff. But God, I'm getting complicated now. But my main point anyway is that the hobbler horse was kind of would have blurred in between the north of England, Scotland, and then obviously Ireland as well. And the hobbler horse is a type of horse that was used for raiding in those areas, and they were very, very fast. They were specifically bred for raiding. So it's no surprise that you would have like literature and mythology and stuff around the hobbler horse to romanticize them and that. Were Bonactors non-professional Irish foot soldiers as opposed to Kerns? Bonactors, I'm sure that was the contract of the Kerns and the Gallowglass. So Bonacht is pretty much, I'm sure that is the contract that the Kerns, because you're talking about the coin and levy contracts that the Fitzgeralds and the Butlers bring in. Obviously, once again, I'm up for correction on that one. But I'm sure the Bonacht, that is pretty much the contract that the Gallowglass and the Kerns are put on at the time. Because it's mostly the levies and stuff are the non-professional. And the thing about the reason why we don't see, like, there's levies used in the Wars of the Roses, and the English sign up levies from Ireland to bring over to France in the 100 Years' War. But the reason why we don't see too many levies, which are pretty much the peasants that are brought up from the land, is because Ireland is mostly fixed on cattle raiding warfare, so they don't really need too many levies. They just need professionals to rob cattle. So most of the time, from my research, there is no need to be bringing up the levies. So if you're talking about low level, foot soldiers and stuff, you're pretty much looking at the levies. I have all the Gaelic words for that and Irish words and stuff. I'll post that up over the week and stuff, because I have all those words for the low level non-professional foot soldiers. But the Bonacht, the Kerns, anytime you see kind of the words Bonacht, Kern and Gallowglass, you're still talking about professional level, and you're talking about people who would have been trained up from the age of 7, from my understanding, when they went into Fosterage and that, all the way up to around the age of 25 and stuff. Would have kept up a very professional level, and then obviously they would have either inherited the land given to them by death of their father, or they would have continued being Kern or Gallowglass, even depending on where they were on the pecking order of what they were going to inherit, because there were a lot of sons born who were not going to inherit anything, especially if you were an orphan or something, and you would have lost your land through various reasons. You would probably spent the rest of your life either as a Gallowglass or a Kern. So yeah, so many reavers. Oh yeah, sorry. When the reavers were driven out of the borders, a lot of the horses eventually ended up in America. Oh, I did not know that. That's a very good point as well. I could actually imagine that as well. That they would have been brought over and stuff. Didn't know that. That's fascinating now. So reavers ended up in the north of Ireland. Yeah, so many reavers did. The border reavers. We were just I was actually watching Outlander last night with the wife, and we were just saying that last night, how the Stuarts, every single person they didn't get on with, they just rounded them up and dumped them in the heart of the north of Ireland. And then you had families who were just like, oh, they had enough of this, and they just immigrated over to America. And like, even today, like, I was a few weeks ago, we found a YouTuber, I think it's about 3 weeks ago, and she was related to the Ulster Scots, but she was learning Ulster Irish again. Her channel is somewhere on YouTube. I'll have to post it up for you guys. But her Irish is so good, and she's related to the Ulster Scots, and then in return, then she's also related to the Border Reavers. But she would have been the families up in the north of Ireland, the Ulster Scots, that basically just got sick of everything that was going on between the War of the Three Kingdoms between Ireland and England, and then later on then the Williamite Jacobite Wars, that just heavily affected the region up in the north of Ireland. And so many of them just got kind of sick of what was going on and just immigrated over to America, like. And I don't blame them, honestly, like. So Fosterage, Toyster were good stuff, and we lost that. I think our culture could benefit from. God, now you're going into the complex stuff. From a medievalist, I would definitely 100% agree on that. When it comes down to modern history, I don't know. I don't specialize in modern history and stuff, but definitely from a medieval point of view, yeah. I think fosterage, what was it? Fosterage, marriage, and what was it? Fosterage, marriage, and we have a third one. Where's the third one again? Fosterage, marriage, and adoption, wasn't it? Yes, it is, where we adopt children into our houses. For people that are unaware, by the way, when you were age 7, both boys and girls were adopted into neighbouring families, and also if your parents fostered into, what was it, fosterage, marriage, and hostages. That's what I get mixed up with. I'm tripping over myself. I got mixed up with adoption and fosterage. Yeah. That's my wife tipping away in the background, by the way, if no one's noticed. Yeah, it's early in my morning. My brain is still turning on. But yeah, it is, what was it? Fosterage, marriage, and hostages. For people who didn't realize, people would have fostered each other into different clans, and that was to bring more clan unity into the island of Ireland, in the realm at the time. So within the realm of Ireland and the realm of the Gaelic world it spills into Scotland, you would have had fosterage going on, where at the age of 7 they would have fostered their children into another clan, so that clan is more together. And it worked similar to marriage as well. It's the same thing with marriage alliances that were going on. And then any clans that weren't behaving, what you do to make sure they're still connected with your society is you steal some of the people in their clan. So that way, if they misbehave, you give them the old chop. But it's mostly compensation. The Irish don't like physical executions. We were talking, myself and the wife were talking about this last night. Where Outlander, where there's a lot of physical punishments. The Irish, even into the 15th, 16th century, during the Viking Age, it's funny, the Irish seem to like violence more during the Viking Age, but in the late medieval period, the Irish don't seem to like violence all that much whatsoever. You have a lot of compensation going on. Sorry. And then when we do see physical punishments going on, a lot of clans are very annoyed about the physical punishments that are seen, or kind of executions that are pulled off. So they try to, the higher ups, like the likes of the O'Neills and the Fitzgeralds and stuff, the nobility, they don't like doing too many physical punishments or any form of executions, because it annoys a lot of clans, and a lot of clans then turn it from a execution. So if I'm a Fitzgerald and I execute a member of your clan, you turn that into a blood feud. So then you're at war with me. Instead of just taking the punishment like you would have done in England and stuff, instead your entire family turns on the Plantagenet family, which kind of breaks down society in a way. So to avoid a lot of these blood feuds against the government, they trying to bring in compensation. So if you break the law, you pay either a compensation of cattle, currency, which is coin, or you would pay you would give over your servants. So you would give over like Gallowglass or house servants, or even a slave if you manage to kidnap someone. So servants were taken over, or if you didn't have any of that, you would have given over hostage. Hostage would have been payment. So the Irish didn't like physical punishments and stuff. So you would have had fosterage. So how Ireland and the whole realm of Ireland and the Gaelic world was connected was fosterage, hostage, and marriage. Where else are we? Scott alight levies. Yeah. The area means hostage. I think there were. Oh yeah, that was the realm in between the northern and southern Enel. Yeah, and that's the same with Dacia. They think Dacia as well is another word that's a play on hostage as well. That those two Tuits were famous for giving up hostages to the Enail or the Kingdom of Munster. So the Enail were mostly active in the early medieval period. If you don't know, the Enail were mostly active in the centre of Ireland in Clontarf. That was the southern Enail, and then the northern Enail were up more in the north part of Ireland. And then obviously there's two realms in between, and they think it's the same with the Dacia as well, who are in the Leinster area, connected to Munster, which would have also taken hostages in that area. There's a lot of, if you look into the early medieval period, the Ushraga, the Kingdom of Munster, and the Enail are constantly going into what is the present day Dublin and what was it, Carlow and a few other spots, Kilkenny. Sorry, no, Kilkenny's Ushraga. Sorry, but basically the whole Waterford area and stuff. There was a lot of hostages taken in that area to keep them loyal to either the Kingdom of Munster in the south or up in the Enail territories. Thanks very much, Michael. Thanks very much. Have a good night there as well. Thanks for staying tuned. What time are we on now? About 8 o'clock, isn't it? Yeah, turning on 8 o'clock. So it's about bedtime for some of you lads in Ireland. So good night, sleep tight. I will be chatting away for another hour with a few of the Irish Australians, Irish Canadians, and Irish Americans, and everyone else in between. For everyone in Ireland, anyway, good night, sleep tight. Don't let the bed bugs bite. By the way, we're meant to be talking about 15th century Scottish clothing. So if anybody has any more questions on Scottish clothing, you can ask away, and I will flick through this as well. And if Wayne has any questions, he'll definitely get his ones. How can I send you a couple of books, man? Oh, I'm on the Patreon. So switch over. If you go onto the page itself, Wayne, you can sign up. I have classes now, Wayne. Actually, Wayne, you might be into the classes. I have classes starting, tomorrow morning, that you might be into, if you can get up at that time. But yeah, go on to my main page itself, and there you can, at the very top, I've got the Patreon. And you can click on, you can have it all, read notes, scroll on that. I've tidied that all up for you as well, Wayne, so you can actually see what the different thing is. But for about 20, it's in American dollars, Wayne. But for about 20 bucks, you can jump into the classes. I've got, for 20, I've got the regular classes, and it's only basic Irish classes, because people were asking me to go over the basics of Irish medieval history, because as you see there with the questions and stuff, the conversation goes 100 miles an hour at times. So a lot of people get lost with the basics. So people were asking me to go over like really basic Irish medieval history. So I have those classes going on the Sunday evening if you're living in America and Ireland and Canada. But for us over in the Pacific, Wayne, it's on the Monday mornings. And I'm doing just basic classes, and I only just started that off, so I'm only at the very start. Just when Niall and the 9 hostages was going over to the north of France and the southern part of England, to go raiding hostages and to bring them back to Ireland. So I'm only at the very start of the early medieval period, the very start of the medieval period. For anyone that wants to jump in as well, I'm only just starting these classes, and you can jump in anytime you want as well, because it's a class with a new topic pretty much every week, and then every month the theme changes as well. So you guys can jump in anytime you like, and then I like to put together a little you guys can put together essays and presentations and stuff at the end of the month, and I can check them out as well, to basically give advice and stuff if you were going for like a historical presentation at a library, or if you wanted to go up to university standard or anything. You guys can do that as well. Where was I with my waffle? Right. Oh yeah, determined access. Climate. Yeah, that was another thing as well. Obviously, from what I can gather, it's much more colder, obviously, up in the Highlands of Scotland than it is in the Lowlands, if we're talking about climate. So if you're talking about, like, this is in the Lowlands they would have had more French clothing and stuff. But you can see straight away it's much more lighter. So Edinburgh, from my interpretation, up for correction there, because I don't actually live in Edinburgh, it's much more. It's still cold in Edinburgh. I've been to Edinburgh, it's much more colder, but it's not as cold as it would be in the Highlands. And I'm up for correction on that one, anybody who actually lives up in that whole region and stuff. But up in the Highlands, you're dealing more with brat that would have been brought over from Ireland. This is called brat. Regarding women's clothing, you mentioned the upper class were influenced by Burgundian French fashion, which is the Lowlands. But how were the Italian influenced in Ireland and Scotland? The Italian, when it comes on to the Italian stuff, I'm sure that comes in much later on. I'm not sure about Scotland, and I assume straight away Scotland will be mimicking whatever the court is doing in Paris, because Edinburgh with the Stuarts and Paris are always, all the way up to the end in 1603, are very, very close together. So I'm assuming Edinburgh will be mimicking whatever is happening in the Lowlands. But if we look at, this is 1538, and you can still see that the Gaelic areas are still kind of mimicking whatever the Gaelic areas in the north of Ireland is doing. You can see that with the brat, you can see that with the herringbone cloak as he's wearing here, and then you can see the trolls. So the Gaelic are still sort of doing their own thing. Most likely, if you can deal with somebody who's more specialized in that region, they'll probably point out the various Italian interpretations in there, because I do believe that there might be Italian interpretations going on in Ireland and stuff. But as myself and Rachel were discussing earlier, and I don't know, because the find we do have in Ireland is this one. This is obviously a find that we do have that could be dated to around the late 15th century into the 16th century, and perhaps even the 17th century, which is here, which we can also see in a 15th century manuscript here. And that's why some people would argue that this can be dated to the 15th century. And that's Ireland. So this actual book is from the... Oh, that's grand. Just let me get back to you there. That's grand. We can sort that out later, Rachel. Yeah, there's a slight hiccup. If anybody wasn't paying attention, Rachel was just coming in from overseas and stuff. She's been busy with the dancing and stuff. So we had a little bit of a problem there this morning and stuff. I'll sort that out in a bit, because I have bits going on in the background right now. So I'll finish the thing up in about an hour, and then I'll have Rachel jump on and stuff. Yeah. So what was it? Where was I? Actually, I'll finish this up, because I don't want stuff in the background being seen in that. So I'll do that in about an hour and stuff. Let me see. Oh yeah, this is where it was, my train of thought. The Fitzgeralds. So it's the Fitzgeralds that have the connection with the Geraldinis in Florence, who are the same ones that we see in the Mona Lisa smile and stuff. So allegedly, the Fitzgeralds, if you didn't know this one, is related to the Geraldinis. Allegedly, according to the Fitzgeralds in the Irish Parliament in 1420, so around 1420, they declared that they were not in fact a Norman family, they're in fact a Florentine family related to the Geraldinis in Florence. And so there's a trade connection there. And then when we look into the nobles, they start getting names like Silken Thomas. And then if we... Oh yeah, that's... Yeah, I was assuming that as well, Rachel. There's no fuss. You were last night as well. I thought it was something like that as well. That's perfectly grand, Rachel. Right. I'm over. Oh yeah. So anyway, because the Fitzgeralds now have a trade connection between Florence to Kerry, We can see then the imports of wool going between, and because they're also popping up then with names from Silken Thomas, like the name Silken Thomas Fitzgerald, it's quite clear they're wearing what was it, silk from Florence. On top of that as well, what else do we bloody have? Oh yeah, the what was it? Bum, 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 bum. The Tudors during the later stages of the Wars of the Roses in Ireland. For those who don't know, there's a war in England around 1450, the 1450s, 1460s, that kicks off between two opposing families in England, which is the Lancastrians and the Yorkists. The Lancastrians win. Sorry, both of them lose, and eventually another family comes in called the Tudors, who claim that they're the successors to Lancastrians. They beat the Yorkists and they marry into the two families. But the Tudors in Ireland, the Fitzgeralds, are supporting the Yorkists. So when the Tudors end up beating the Yorkists, they then kind of go to war with each other. First, the Fitzgeralds invade, so they have an Irish invasion to the north of England called the Battle of Stokefield. We lose horribly. It goes terribly, terribly wrong. And then in retaliation, the Tudors come over to Ireland, and there's sort of a stalemate that happens. And then there's kind of, what was it? Henry VII, who is the king, kind of the head of the Tudors, who wins. He gets crowned King of England and becomes Henry VII. And then he turns around to the Fitzgeralds and he says that basically the Fitzgeralds are king all but in name, because they have full control of the Irish Parliament, and there's nothing really the Tudors can do for the time being until around 1534, when they bring in the Tudor conquest of Ireland. But when the Tudors are going into and sieging the Fitzgeralds and stuff, and they're taking over their castles, they document that the Fitzgeralds have a lot of silk, a lot of fancy silk, and they also document that they have really, really fancy armor. And this is kind of hinted that they might have armor from Italy perhaps, but we don't know. If I was to guess, the armor style that they would have had, it most likely was probably an English style. To argue what kind of Italian style they would have had is anyone's guess. But yeah, it kind of highlights the relationship the Fitzgeralds have with what was it? The Fitzgeralds have with Florence at the time. And obviously then we would have had the trade of wool and also Irish wolfhounds. If you've never seen an Irish wolfhound, it's basically a giant dog that was brought over. Letter, crop up, the household accounts in archaeology. It does not seem to be very common. Yeah, it's very haphazard, that period. One of the biggest problems we have, it's a kind of, we have so much of a keyhole into the 15th and 16th century, especially with the Fitzgeralds, and it's a massive tease, like, because we get these little glimpses where they talk about silk a little bit, and then they talk about like fancy armor and stuff, but we have no idea what this fancy armor looks like. Especially when you're talking about like uneducated, like, I don't want to be talking down of the Tudor soldiers that would have gone into these areas. They're describing this fancy armor and fancy silk and stuff, but they don't really know what they're describing because they perhaps have never seen Italian silk before, compared to if the Tudors themselves had taken over these castles, who, like the Tudors, what was it, Henry VII would have been educated to know what Italian silk looked like or Italian armor, but he didn't he didn't go over to Ireland, so he didn't review any of this himself. So we don't have, all we do we have our accounts are kind of more from the kind of lesser educated side of things, and it's the same later on as well when we're dealing with the documents that are found in the what was it, the War of the Three Kingdoms between Ireland and Britain, Cromwell's conquest of Ireland around 1641 to 1651, 1561, yeah, 15, anyway, doesn't matter. Around Cromwell's conquest of Ireland, the documentation is written really bad English, and it's because it's written for more of the uneducated class who are trying to do guesswork of how words are pronounced. Irish wolfhound, Irish wolfhounds are cute and cuddly. Think Seamus and Prince. Yeah, Irish wolfhounds are really, really awesome. I'm a huge fan of Irish wolfhounds as well. There's loads of them around Kerry and stuff. If you do the trip around the Kerry ring, where you would have done the Ross Castle and stuff and gone around the Fitzgerald territories, there's a good few Irish wolfhounds around there, around the Kerry ring and stuff. And there's a few tours you can take where they'll show you Irish wolfhounds and stuff, and they are huge. They're bigger than my wife and stuff. Absolutely big, massive, towering things. Now, where was I in this one? Oh yeah. Let me see. We covered most of these at this point. And tunics and doublets often padded. Hose and breeches, we covered that one. Cloaks and gowns, we covered that one as well. European inspired hardware. Yeah, that would have been also, when it comes down to European inspired, that would have been mostly around the Lowland areas. Around, specifically around Edinburgh and the Stuart court. They would have mostly fallen in with the headwear that was worn in Paris and stuff, because once again, as I was saying, it was the Stuarts that were jumping in bed with the court in Paris. Social status, yeah, depending on, obviously, what I have today is mostly of the higher status. So this is what the higher, because most of the nobles, the Stuarts and stuff, would have hung around Paris with the French and stuff. They would have dressed very kind of higher status French, but obviously the commoners in that period would have dressed more kind of English. Do I have any of the slower status? This is from the Dutch area, but the Lowlanders would have dressed more kind of, had more of kind of an English influence from the lower status sphere. But then the Highlanders obviously would have dressed more Gaelic. Let me see if I have anything that's more kind of Gaelicish. This is kind of more of the Gaelic clothing that you would have worn, and that would have been seen more often in the Highland areas. Once again, that's kind of, as you can see there, this is a Gaelic bard from Ireland, because this is a find in Ireland. But this clothing and stuff would have been worn more by the Gaelic in the Highland areas. Depends on what you mean by modern ones. Yeah. Let me see where else. Leather would have been used by military tents, perhaps. Oh, where am I? Yeah, leather is a very, very, when it comes down to the military usage and stuff, it's always an argument that kicks off, especially the armor side of things, if people were wearing leather as form of armor and stuff, because especially like with the early medieval period and stuff, if you're talking about the early medieval period and the usage of leather, a lot of people would argue, but it's easier to use padded, basically a build-up of linen and stuff, and use that as a form of armor rather than leather. And then in the late medieval period and stuff, I've heard of people making an argument for in between the gaps of the armor and stuff. So yeah, that's a pretty deep argument when it comes down to the usage of leather. Depends on what you mean. What bonnet in the 15th century just meant hat. So there you go. And I think we have, did I put together, this one obviously has a good few hats. The only person who's not wearing a hat here is the main noble in the center. Obviously I think Rachel probably knows which picture this one is that I just stole from during the week. Seal and baby hats. See if I have any other ones with hats going on. I have hats going on here as well. And where else am I going? Oh yeah, and we've got more hats here as well. Hats, hats, hats. No hats here though. It makes me wonder if it's just the higher classes that have hats on, or people who go into, because I know in Ireland it's mostly anyone who's inside of the settlements and stuff have to have something to cover the hair, but most of these pictures are taken out in the countryside and stuff, so perhaps it's just a thing in the settlements, because in Ireland it is, if you're going into a settlement your hair needs to be covered, and then when you're outside of the settlement you can have your hair growing freely. From my reading of the literature and Irish literature, do not quote me when it comes down to Scotland and mainland Europe. When it comes down to the wearing of hats, but this is one's taken in the Danish one, and then when we see in the courts, I think it was only the main noble here that didn't have a hat on. Obviously, Rachel could probably correct all of this. Seal and baby hats. Where was I pushing with the conversation? That's for women, worn as sleeves and cloak. Oh yeah. Let me see. Did I have? Oh yeah. So obviously at the time, allegedly so far, all we have is, if we're talking about especially up in the Highlands and stuff, we have cloaks for women. These ones here. The Great Kilt is first mentioned with the Redshanks, the Scottish mercenaries that go into Ireland. But if Scottish women were wearing great kilts, I'm aware of the finds that happened around the 16th century, and also with the Jacobite Williamite wars that kick off in the 17th century of women wearing great kilts. If women are wearing great kilts in the Highlands before then, I'm not quite sure, but they're definitely also wearing oh yeah, there we go, cloaks. So women probably would have worn cloaks like this as well around the place. The artwork can be tricky as evidence of what people wore. A lot of medieval art is depicting of stories and the clothing reflecting specific stories, so it can be read carefully. Yeah, that's also a very good point as well. 15th century headwear was pretty grand. It was grand inside the settlements. Because from, you see, Scotland, when it comes on to Scotland and trying to get the laws, it's so haphazard. Because I was even watching Outlander last night, and when people were breaking laws in Scotland, and I have come across this in literature as well, is that they're turning over, especially in the settlements, to physical violence to pay for crimes committed, compared to Ireland, where they're constantly switching over to compensation, where they have to pay in cattle and stuff. So when it comes down to following the laws, it's so... my main point there is that Scotland seems to be in between kind of the Scottish and the Gaelic world. So you have the Lowlands and the Highlands, but even on top of that, it's blurry. Especially when you were dealing with the settlement that's in the... What was it? Oh, what is the name of the settlement that's in Outlanders? I can't remember, but the settlement that's in the Outlander program, that settlement is in between the Lowland world, where you can see the presidents and stuff, and the Lowlanders, and the Highlander world, where you can see the Gaelic and stuff. And so those laws are in between the two of them. And I saw punishments dished out to the Gaelic Scottish, the Highlanders, that were physical violence, which to me I thought was quite strange, because in Ireland you wouldn't have done physical violence. So it seems to be the laws in Scotland are very, very blurred. Between kind of European laws to kind of Gaelic Highlander laws. So I assume that's the same with clothing as well, compared to in Ireland, where it's very kind of Gaelic, where you have English influences coming in, but when it comes down to the laws of clothing and stuff, they keep to... you also have early Irish farming as well, but they mostly keep to the likes of early Irish law. This is Fergus Kelly's one that has the laws for Gaelic, and even inside of the Anglo-Irish areas, they're keeping somewhat to the Gaelic rules, because it's just easier to govern the people in Ireland. Because anytime you go away from the Brehon laws and stuff, the clans kind of get really annoyed, especially when you're dishing out physical violence. So if someone breaks the law, and the butlers, who are Anglo-Irish, if they commit then an execution or any form of physical violence against the clan, there's retaliation there. So it seems to me that the laws would then, that reflect what you can wear and not wear, seems to be slightly more haphazard in Scotland compared to Ireland, where there's laws set in place in Ireland on what you can wear and not wear. Wasn't the Bonachta an Irish soldier that came later than the Kern and reflected midsection? Bonocta is a funny word because I'm pretty sure that's under the wording for mercenary. I'll come back to Ryan. Let me go back because I have all these in my notes and stuff of the correct wording for mercenaries and stuff. Because I think Wayne was saying the same thing about the Bonocta as well early on. But let me get back to you on that one. I'll just make. Do you know what? If I don't get, I'm planning on having Clint. I need to message Clint and stuff, and try to organize a video on him because he specializes in Scottish medieval history. If I don't get him on this week or next week or so, what I'll do actually this week is a video on the military terms, and I'll get the actual term for Bonocta, because I'm pretty sure that's just Bonocta is an overall word for mercenary, professional soldier, rather than just the kind of midsection levies that held the line. So let me get back to you on that one, because the problem with the Gaelic mercenary, the wordings are it's trying to get the right meaning for the words, the actual proper translation and stuff. Because as you know yourself, if you're dealing with languages, you don't always get the proper full translation over. So let me actually get into my notes and get the proper translation for Bonocta. Kerns and Gallowglass, as you know yourself, are professionals, so that's pretty solid. Just popped in for a few seconds. Wish I could stay and catch up on rewatch. Yeah, I'll be keeping this video up anyway, so you'll definitely be able to catch up with this, no problem. Scots seem a bit more harsh than the Irish, mate. Yeah, I was watching, I think Outlander is a good example of that on the second episode when they're dealing out punishments to children. We don't do physical punishments to children until the 9th. Punishments dished out to children is absolutely savage in the 19th and 20th century Ireland, but none of that happens whatsoever in the medieval period. It's so bad, it's so weird, because anytime somebody breaks the law, they have to pay compensation in Ireland. If you commit any form of physical violence, don't get me wrong, there is executions that happen in Ireland, but they're rare cases. Majority of the time, if somebody breaks the law, they have to pay compensation, and that stops blood feuds from kicking off. Because if for example, the person who dishes out the punishment, such as the Fitzgeralds or the Butlers, if they do the punishment to whoever would commit the crime, he's part of a clan. His clan is going to look for retaliation, and it causes a blood feud. To stop the blood feud, the Fitzgeralds will go to a Brehon, somebody who specialises in Brehon law. He'll dish out the correct compensation using Irish law, and then he'll pay over. So there isn't a a blood feud kicking off. The only time is that you would come across a blood feud is when someone cannot pay compensation, and if you can't pay compensation, his clan probably isn't good enough to go to war with another clan. So execution, isn't such a bad idea. And also, if you have a blood feud within the same clan, so a clan's going to find it difficult to pay compensation to itself. So what happens is you have execution kicks off. So that's one of the few examples that you would have of an actual execution kicking off. Now, it's when you're dealing with areas around the Pale and settlements such as Cork and Dublin. Once again, it can be a little bit still more funny because you're dealing with the kind of more English regions and stuff. But for the most part, people prefer to pay compensation in medieval Ireland to avoid blood feuds kicking off. But Scotland, you're right, Wayne, it's kind of more haphazard. It's in between kind of the European influences in the Lowlands, and then in the Highlands then more of the Gaelic influences. And it's definitely something, it's outside of my region of speciality. But from what I read and stuff, it's quite unusual for me. Like, I'll have to definitely get a Scottish historian in. I'm planning on having a little chat with Clint and a few of the other Scottish historians and stuff, and seeing if I can get a few of the lads in to have a chat on that. And punishments is definitely a topic we need to bring in. Does compensation exist in Scotland? How was physical punishment dished out and stuff? Definitely an interesting topic, like. Especially when you're dealing with so many of the Gaelic that live in Scotland and stuff, how because there's constant movement. It's not like this movement stops during the medieval period. It's constant. Like people literally wake up in the morning, get on a boat, and sail to Scotland. Within an hour, they're in Scotland and hang around with Scottish people. If they break a law in Scotland, do they get physical violence dished out to them, or do they just pay compensation? You know. So I definitely do need to talk to a Scottish historian on that. Like, can change over time. Languages and tricky devil. Yeah, languages are very, very funny. I think I covered most of the questions and stuff. I'm gonna stay on this for another half an hour, and then I'm gonna pop away later on. I think I covered the majority of the subjects on this one. Let me see if there's anything else. Oh, tartans. Don't think I talked about tartans today. Also, on top of that, right? While I was putting this together, what was it, last night? I was doing the last bits. Suddenly, all these videos popped up talking about Scottish clothing, specifically around the Jacobite and Williamite Wars and tartan. So, if you want to go deeper into all this conversation and stuff, literally, if you go over to US Kilts and Celtic Traditions, they have 2 videos that literally got released in the last 24 hours. Especially this one, the Rebellion of Bunny Prince Charles. Absolutely magnificent video. And then you had, what was it? They had a follow-up, a Q&A after that, which was once again absolutely fantastic because the questions people were asking were brilliant on that one. And then on top of that, Scotland history tours. They also popped up with Scottish clothing all at once as well. So definitely pop over to those 2 videos after this Q&A, or right now if you wanted to. Australia had a similar system. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I'd have to look into all that stuff, Wayne. But yeah. So if you want to go and delve in deeper into all the tartan stuff, especially between the period of the Williamite Jacobite Wars, definitely check out the Rebellion of, what was it, US Kilts and Celtic Traditions and Scotland history tours, because their new videos are just up now. I haven't seen the Mystery of Tartan yet. It literally popped up last night as I was going into bed, and I had to throw that in there as well because it's a part of this wider conversation that's happening this weekend. Because obviously the whole conversation between Tartan and stuff suddenly blew up with the algorithm and stuff. It could be down to the fact of Trump going into the Isles and stuff, and his whole connection with the clouds and stuff could be tickling the algorithm a little bit. That's my assumption anyway. Where else was I? Oh yeah, that's way out of my understanding, Wayne. Yeah, Wayne, you'll definitely have to explain that one to me, because when it comes down to Australia, that's definitely out of my field of expertise, way out there. Because you're even telling me about what was it, movies and stuff, and I'm absolutely clueless. Like, don't get me wrong, Australia's awesome and everything, and I get along with Australian people. When it comes down to Australian history, so much of it, I find it really, really interesting, but so much of it, I'm just completely lost in the conversation. Like, yeah, completely. When it comes down to all that stuff with Australian stuff, completely lost in the conversation. Like, I think I covered all the basic stuff. Because I think the first, from what I remember, going into I think it's around the 1700s that we start to see the Irish during the period. Is it? Well, obviously Wayne will correct me on this one, but I think it's the period of the Williamite Jacobite Wars. Actually, switch back to that video. So that we see, isn't it prisoners that brought over from that period over to Australia and stuff? It's either the 1700s or definitely by the 1800s where prisoners brought over to Australia. Had laws that limit full-scale violence like the Irish. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Especially when you're dealing with people who are more kind of family-based. I think any society that are very family-based, where the family have to work as a whole, and if they're being punished, because you can see that's a problem that constantly pops up in Kenya, between the British and the Chinese. Anytime they try to bring anyone to court or law in Kenya, they end up getting retaliation against them as a whole by families in Kenya. Because if you punish one person in Kenya, you're punishing the whole family, and then that causes then retaliation to the likes of the Chinese and the British that are in Kenya. So that can be quite complicated politically. So yeah, families are like that. Did we discuss medieval painter funds? I think I did. Pretty much have all these up here. Heaps of Irish convicts. The textures. I did alright. I'm sure I did. Bum, 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 bum. I have the latest one anyway here. That's obviously the 16th century clothing is Scotland. This is the oldest find in Scotland, discovered in the bog in the Glen. The Tartan now is over in Dundee Museum, so definitely go and give that an old visit. But that was only studied this week. Interesting, Wayne. Did the British make laws against it? I have to bring Wayne on this, and then we can just do Irish. What was it? Go way over the subject of medieval history completely. I think that's the problem. All right, you try to cut up in 1603, but because Irish history continues developing, especially with the development of people and stuff, it's difficult to keep to 1603. Like, I covered the textures here as well during the chat. Obviously that's the Italian find, and that's the Irish one. The Brits were pretty harsh on... Yeah, I could mention the Brits, because it was the same with the Americans as well, going into the Philippines, and also the Spanish as well. It's quite funny because you can see that in Okinawa as well. Anytime locals behave like the way they would usually do, especially like if you're dealing with Okinawa, the locals drive, they have their own style of driving, but it technically breaks the law. So you have like the likes of the Japanese government and the Americans who get quite annoyed about all that kind of stuff, and I can imagine that's probably the problem when it comes down to people going in and colonizing, that even when they're not trying to force themselves on the area, that even when they break laws that they don't like, it can get kind of funny. Banning of any clothing that set apart a Gallowglass was widely done on both Ireland and Scotland. That's interesting. Do you have any references for banning of clothing in Scotland? Because in Ireland we have, first off, we have the Statutes of Kilkenny, which tried to ban specifically the Bart, which is this cloak here. And we also have, later on then, we have Poynings Law in Ireland, which was brought in by the Tudors. The Tudors tried to bring in Poynings Law that tries to reinforce all this, but straight away, it's completely ignored. Like the Butlers and the Fitzgeralds just completely ignore both the Statutes of Kilkenny and later on then Poynings Law that's brought in by the Tudors. So those are the two laws that I know that of banning of clothing in Ireland. I'm aware the Stuarts, perhaps, and I'm up for correction on this, did try to bring in laws to ban Highland clothes to make them more European. So I think I'm up for correction on that one, but I think the Stuarts did bring in laws to try to ban clothing and stuff. I'm unaware of the English ever trying to actually ban clothing. I know in media and stuff they try to bring in the sense of Edward the First trying to bring in laws that ban clothing and stuff, but I'm completely unaware of Edward the First trying to bring in any laws trying to ban clothing. 1537, Act of English Order, Habit and Language. That's Ireland though, isn't it, Ryan? And I think that law was ignored as well, like pretty much all the other laws, because in 1570, when you got Desmond's Rebellion, you have endless amount of descriptions of the Fitzgeralds dressed completely Gaelic as the savages. So that was definitely ignored as well. Banning of clothing. Did that show context between Scotland and the continent? Did the Nick kit off the Scots? Did the Irish nick the kilt off the Scots? Ah, the grey kilt. I should have bloody put in a bloody picture of the grey kilt. I was actually lying in bed last night thinking to myself, I should put in a picture of the grey kilt. I am missing the bloody grey kilt. I will post up the grey kilt in my posts. But yeah, the grey kilt pops up. It perhaps may have popped up in the late 15th century with the arrival of the Red Shanks, the Scottish mercenaries, which is basically, it's a big massive cloak that they would have worn. The Red Shanks were wearing it because compared to the Gallowglass that came over, the Gallowglass when they went over to Ireland had Pacific lodging, a place to stay, especially around the 15th century. They had what was it, tower houses and stuff that the Gallowglass were staying in. The Red Shanks on the other hand didn't. They came over only during the summer months, not during the winter. They came over during the summer, and the majority of the time the Red Shanks were camping out in the forestry and stuff, and they actually used their great kilts, their big massive cloaks, and they would have wrapped it around themselves at night time, and then use the excess to use a kind of as a overall cover to kind of block itself from the rain and stuff. So they have various techniques to wrap themselves up at night time, and even during the day and stuff to wrap up the great kilt around themselves. So we may have seen the great kilt starting to appear in the late 15th century going into the 16th century, and then eventually that gets brought down and inspires that kilt gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and by the time we get up to the Victorian period, it inspires the kilt we know in the 19th century with the Victorians, basically the modern kilt that we know today. Yes, that's Ireland. 1537 Act of the English. Yeah, I'm aware of Poynings Law, the 1537 one, done because that would have been around Henry VIII, because he's already at war with the, what was it called, the Kildare Fitzgeralds at that point. So the Act of the English Order, I'll have to look into that one because he's already at war with like the Silk and Thomas and stuff, and those boys are already wearing a whole load of Gaelic clothing with clothing from the Florentines and stuff. So yeah, they were pretty mad alright at that point when it came down to clothing. So I can see why they were trying to bring in clothing laws against the Irish, especially when they're dressing completely mental at that point, around the period of the Kildare rebellions. Yeah. Bum bum bum. Where am I? Did the Irish nick the kilt? We did that one. Yes, that's Ireland. The American population of military bases in Okinawa actually outnumber the native islanders, I believe. Yeah, the Americans way outnumbered the locals for a long time. I think it's about slightly starting to balance out now, when it comes down to the likes of modern warfare and stuff. And they want to try, because the fighting has become more missile based here, they want to try to move some of the Marines to the islands and stuff, but I have no clue. Because ultimately it's all smokes and mirrors. We have no idea what's actually going on and stuff. But yeah, there's a lot of Americans over here. Bum, bum, bum. I have a lot more references to Ireland and Scotland, but the Stuarts, the one I was specifically thinking of, and let me see if I can track down the one. Yeah, definitely send me on the ones with the Scottish and your references in Scotland and stuff, because Scotland is not my expertise, but geez, would I be interested in all that stuff. Any other questions people have here, definitely shove it up and I will try to answer it to the best of my ability. Which I don't, except for the missing of the grey kilt. The grey kilt is the only one I think I'm missing here. And why I didn't shove it in. And I was thinking about it bloody last night as well. But you can easily just type in Red Shanks grey kilt, and it should pop up straight away with the grey kilt and that. Still bonkers. Bum, bum. Yeah, pretty much. Especially if you're dealing with the likes of laws. What was it? The laws against clothing and stuff, because they're so stupid. Because if you're looking at the statutes of Kilkenny was looking to remove the brat, and of course that wasn't going to work because Ireland is really cold. Like most of the time, especially during the cold weather, that cloak is not going to keep you warm. Perhaps in the settlements in England it might keep you warm, But out in the countryside in Kerry, Galway, and up in the north of Ireland, that what was it? This is not going to keep you warm during the, especially during the winter. You know, never mind the majority of the summer, like where it still gets very very cold. This, on the other hand, will keep you warm. So trying to ban this because you see it as savage is bonkers, like absolutely insane. The great kilt is also called the plaid. Yes, it is. But I like to dumb the conversation most of the time. Um, I know we have yes two. Australia also. Mm. Right. But it's the same with like what else gets banned? Tartan. So Tartan obviously gets romanticized with the Jacobite rising as well. So obviously during the statutes of Kilkenny in the 14th century, going into the 15th century, the brat gets banned because it's seen as savage and native, right? And then later on, when we go into the Jacobite rising, a lot of people are wearing tartan. And for some reason, because the majority of the Jacobites are wearing tartan, it's seen as a very savage thing. And so they outright just ban tartan. And it's seen as, you know, very villainous to wearing tartan and stuff. And it's just this whole kind of local identity that's foreign to the outsiders coming in to evade. It's just funny how they don't question why people are doing A, B, and C. They just kind of outright ban it. They see it as kind of like, I don't know, some form of like medieval movement of people or something, you know, what they would call like and this is what ends up becoming nationalism and romanticism of the likes of the brat, later on tartan and stuff, is when people go in and ban it, and then people who were rebelling against the system because of, if we were dealing with the Gaelic resurgence in Ireland, you know, first off we had the Statutes of Kilkenny, then it's the rising of tax, where in England you see the Peasants' Revolt, in Ireland you see the Gaelic resurgence led by Art MacMor Cavanagh, and that's where people are kind of romanticising the anti penal laws against the likes of the Statutes of Kilkenny, and then obviously then with the Jacobite rebellion, tartan is, you know, romanticized, because before then, you know, anybody was wearing plaids and tartan and stuff, but it doesn't become romanticized in a kind of nationalist idea until the Jacobite rising. And it's the same thing with the what was it, the Statutes of Kilkenny and the brat and the banning of the brat as well. Like um, it's funny, like, yes, the brat was actually only worn by the nobles. It took a lot to put the brat together. So it's mostly, you would have only seen the high class of the Fitzgeralds, the high class of the Butlers, the high class of the O'Neills and the O'Donnells wearing the brat. You're right, and it's a nightmare to make. I don't have one. I'd absolutely love to get a hold of one. If you actually look at the website here, they can make one up for you. That's where I took this source from. Because not a lot of people have made a brat, because they are a lot of work. But the reason for it, if you look at the fringe here, that's specifically designed so when the rain comes on, this can kind of like filter out the rain much more easier and catch the rain and stuff, compared to if you just have the regular cloak and stuff. So it's designed more as kind of a cover as well against the rain, a protection against the rain. um, from him, it's great. Really, I haven't got anything from him. Yeah, I have, Ryan. I've looked at his website a lot, but I haven't got anything to do with it. I've got no contacts with him yet, but I'd love to get a hold of contacts, because I've been stalking his page for years. Because I absolutely love his stuff. For anybody who's unaware of what Elena is, that's Elena. And this is my theory of basically what Elena would have looked like. And also, most of the information I get from this one, I actually stole from this page here. If anybody wants to go and stalk that one. But yeah, in the 15th century, I do believe the Lena would have looked more like this, and that's to make easier to take armor on and off when dealing with the conservative fighting that was happening in the Hundred Years' War, and the conservative fighting that was happening in the Wars of the Roses, compared to the more cattle raiding that was going on in the period of the Tudor conquest of Ireland. For around the collar would be Teased up around the neck to keep the heat in and the moisture rain out. Yes, that's what I was actually trying to say. Obviously, I'm absolutely terrible when it comes down to describing clothing and stuff and what the practicality of it is. But yeah, that's basically what I was trying to say there. Yeah, that picture doesn't look like it has a great profile. Bum, 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 bum. Too hot for us. Oh yeah, but it's, what was it? The summer now, yeah, of course. But how is it in the winter? Because I hear in the winter it gets quite cold, unless it's quite warm in your area. I don't know. The 19th century nationalism that spreads across Europe is the same nationalism that brings Tartans back into the screen. Romanticism, yeah. Sir Walter Scott has a lot to do with that. Yeah, it was basically, what happened is that the British at that point had taken on a German monarchy, but then Britain was breaking into a empire at that point, and then you had to start kind of the foundations of actual proper modern nationalism that we know today was starting to emerge after the Napoleonic War was over. And Britain was, it was now that Britain was starting to become an empire. I know fucking from the period of the Tudors, Henry VIII declares that he's an empire, but Henry VIII was only governing Ireland, was England, and then Elizabeth Tudor later on, she also declares that she's in the middle of a golden age and stuff. What evidence that she's in the middle of a golden age, I'm not quite sure is what the argument, other than, she had Shakespeare, but regardless, for years, from the Tudor period up to 1803, the English had declared that they were an empire for ages, but they don't actually become an empire until around 1815. And with that as well, and it's also the same period that they finally beat the Irish. They finally beat the Irish around 1803, just after both Irish rebellions. The Irish rebellion of 1795 or 1793, either 1793 or 1795 is the Irish rebellion, and where they actually kill Lord Edward Fitzgerald. Lord Edward Fitzgerald is killed in that one. So once again, the Fitzgeralds are beaten to submission again with that Irish rebellion, and then they have a second rebellion in 1803 with Robert Emmet, who was meant to be hung, drawn, and quartered, but they ended up just hanging him. And with those two defeats, then they go into the Act of Union, that was coming in anyway. They were trying to force that in from the Irish Parliament. So that's the Irish finally beat, and then from there they're also expanding into India and all that stuff. So they had done their conquest of India and various other places, so they could finally become an empire around 1815. So from 1850, just going into the First World War, you have the British Empire, and with that in 1815, the British were trying to completely reinvent themselves, because it's also where you finally start to get Queen's English. I know people have, especially in movies and stuff, they have the romantic idea in England of English people having Queen's English in London and stuff, and in English court, but they didn't. A good example of that is during the period of the Wars of the Roses. The Lancastrians and the Yorkists have two different accents. So not only did they see themselves as two different factions, but because of the native areas that they're from in England, when they were going into court, they had all different funny accents. And it would have been even more funny because Thomas Fitzgerald, during the period of the Wars of the Roses, Thomas Fitzgerald used to go into English court, and he was also considered really foreign because of his thick Kerry accent. So yeah, everybody in the both the English court and perhaps courts throughout all of Europe had all these funny accents when they assembled together. And you don't have that one kind of the Queen's English until around 1815, and that's where the British they were bringing in specialists to teach them how to speak correctly, or the way that the monarchy wanted all the nobles to speak at the time. So that doesn't appear until about 1815. Like even Duke Wellington, he had a very kind of thick Irish accent going into the English court and stuff, and when he ran for elections and that, from my knowledge, I'm for correction on that as well, like. But yeah, the Irish nobility still had their Irish accents, and it was the same with the Scottish as well. You can even say that today, like. Let me see, because obviously I was waffling there for a wee bit. In Scotland, for certain, lots of expanded accounts with full lineage in the 15th century. Queensland, where I live, is hot most of the time. We have little winter down south and colder. Ah, yeah, that's interesting. All right. Yeah, there we go. 1798, Wolftown. Yeah, and that was led by, because Wolftown had to take over because what was it? Lord Edward was beaten early because the British intelligence was on top of them quite early. Um, and then you had I think where Lord Edward Fitzgerald was killed, you had Lord Edward's pub just across the way from it. So if you're looking for that in Dublin, I think you just need to type in Lord Edward's pub, and I think it's the church or cathedral or something where Lord Edward was ambushed and killed. And they finally beat the Irish Parliament and put them into submission. Henry was spoiled man-child. Yeah, my mother would definitely say the same thing as well about Henry VIII, especially his treatment towards women was absolutely terrible. Even for the time, the way he just played Catherine of Aragon and what was it called? Anne Boleyn. No, Anne Boleyn. Yes, it's Anne Boleyn, isn't it? Yeah, the way he played at Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn was absolutely abusive. But you know, I think the French court might be slightly worse on top of that. But he was his trying to divorce Catherine of Aragon that was causing all the problems. But you could easily argue pretty much all of the what was it? Most of the monarchies and stuff are pretty much man children, especially towards their wives and stuff. Except for the Fitzgeralds. I think the Fitzgeralds are the few people where you can find a lot of romantic stories between the Fitzgeralds themselves and then the women they were involved with. But I think it's because a lot of the Fitzgeralds did marry out of love, which did then cause problems, especially with the Statutes of Kilkenny. Because I think the fourth Earl of Desmond Fitzgerald, I think he was usurped by the sixth Earl because he married a local Irish woman that was breaking the statutes of Kilkenny. So you do find examples of the Fitzgeralds being very romantic towards their women and stuff, and kind of having that kind of traditional Celtic Irish romance. So yeah, maybe the Fitzgeralds aren't too bad. But yeah, I could definitely find examples throughout Europe of a lot of monarchies acting like man-children towards their wives and stuff. Yeah, Henry VIII, he's a character, alright, or just a man of his time, perhaps. Where are we? 53. Yeah, I'll go for another 10 minutes. So smash away with any more last questions that you guys have, or any stuff you want to leave in the comment section, and then I will finish up there. Pretty much we have nothing. Just go over a quick review to make sure I smashed everything out. Where was I? That was the news. Oh yeah, the kilt was worn 15th century. Clan specific tartans were purple. Oh shit, I wasn't supposed to click that one. Highland and Lowland dress were different. Oh yeah, we're identical, yeah. Scots painted their face in woad. Oh yeah, I didn't really cover that too much as well. That's another myth as well, especially in the movie Braveheart, where you got Mel Gibson kicking about with the old blue woad on. There he is there, in that picture. And it was, you can find that within the Victorians and stuff, that they talked about the Pictish tribes, and that source then goes over to the Romans. So the Romans described the Pictish tribes up in the north of Scotland of being covered in blue woad, but that's very much debated. I was talking to someone who specializes in the chemicals of woad and stuff, and because it has to mix in with urine and stuff, it may actually burn your skin and eyes. So it's very much debated if the Picts even put blue woad into themselves or not. Not really my specialty and stuff. So obviously, I'd love to know what people's interpretation and stuff is. And I didn't cover too much about the fact that Scotch wore primitive and rugged clothing during that period as well. That's another one that you see, it popped up a lot during a lot of movies and stuff, that when they're depicting the Scots compared to the English are seen as very civilized. And then the what was it? The English are dressed in movies and stuff. They they're just more similar to kind of what you would see kind of like here and stuff. You know, they see the civilized English, and then in the movies you see the uncivilized Scots, and it's to give this idea of civilized versus uncivilized people. But in reality, like, you know, they would have been able to put clothes together. You know, as you can clearly see here, this is your regular Gaelic man clothing that we would have seen in the Highlands, as we can see here with this photo. And obviously this find itself is found in Ireland, and you can see quite clearly people could put clothing together. So people can make clothes in Ireland, surprise surprise, and in Scotland in the Highlands and stuff. So people would not have been dressing like this. You know, they would not have been dressing rugged and primitive. Could the Romans be referring to the tattoos rather than the wood painting? Yeah, I've heard people talk about the tattoos and stuff as well, and geez, that's a big massive argument as well. And then it goes into the fact of, okay, so what tattoos would have had on and stuff. I myself like the romantic idea of them having tattoos and stuff, but I myself haven't found any evidence during the early medieval period, because even in the early medieval period you have a hot debate on if the Scottish, Irish and Scandinavians that were coming into Scotland and Ireland had tattoos on. So the whole idea of tattoos is a massive debate. So, and then it comes down to the fact of, okay, so what tattoos would they have had on? The source that people misconstrues whereas wood comes from Julius Caesar. Yeah, and Julius Caesar is another one that has, he's constantly, his two main forms of propaganda is when he's writing, Julius Caesar, and you need to pay note of this, is when he's saying something negative, it is like people had tattoos on, they are savages, this is a bad thing to be, you know, the destruction of your body and your skin, that's a very negative thing to be doing, you shouldn't be having tattoos on. Tattoos are, you know, considered with slaves and stuff, so he's trying to write this as a very negative light. And then on the second thing, so anything he's trying to write negatively, it's always connected with savagery or, you know, bad stuff and that. And anything he was writing positively about society, like their gods and stuff, or the good stuff to do with their gods, is always connected back to Rome. So he'll find a Roman god, and then he will find a connection, he will find a Celtic god in like Pictland or in Britain and stuff, or in Ireland, or in Gaul. Mostly he does it in Gaul. He'll find like a Celtic god, and he'll find like good traits to do with the Celtic god, and he'll then turn around and says, oh, but that's exactly like our Roman god. And the reason for that is that he's trying to justify that these people are savages, but they need to be civilized, because we can see potential with these people. So when he's writing, he's always writing in the, trying to highlight the fact that these people are savage, you know, they run around in tattoos, but at the same time, some of the gods that they worship are kind of like Roman gods, so we can beat these people and assimilate them into our culture. There's potential to civilize these people. So when reading Julius Caesar, you need to pay attention to the fact that this is, you know, propaganda, and that's the problem with a lot of the Roman sources. So you need to question everything the Romans write, because even like I was talking about this last week on my course that I'm doing over on Patreon, when dealing with the early medieval period and the Romans and the Irish. The Irish are raiding into Britain, and they're constantly like, and these raids are successful. We have finds in Ireland to support the fact that a lot of these early raids were very successful, and yet in all of the Roman literature they're constantly writing that all of Ireland invaded today and we killed all of Ireland, and it says this in the sources, and I'm like, what? So yeah, it's all biasm with the Romans, and we do have to question it. And then if we do believe that they did have tattoos, you know, how did these tattoos look and stuff, because obviously the painting we have here is actually a Victorian painting, and it's a Victorian interpretation of earlier Julius Caesar's interpretation. So yeah, King Harold's body was probably identified, yeah, by tattoos. Yeah, because we can find a lot of evidence, well, literature saying that people would have had tattoos and stuff. But then it's always, because I've been at a lot of early medieval reenactment events and stuff, both in Denmark, Ireland, and in England. And anytime this conversation kicks off, oh my god, it starts the biggest arguments ever. Because it always goes into, okay, what's your evidence? can you actually back up the evidence, and what did these tattoos actually look like? And it does start a lot of fueled arguments online, sorry, not online, in actual historical events and stuff. Anytime people are doing big living history events like the Battle of Clontarf and stuff, it starts a lot of arguments. So yeah, that's pretty much it. If nobody else has any questions or stuff, I will tidy up there and I will go. Obviously, as always, guys, definitely subscribe to the channel. People that were asking about the Patreon stuff, the link should be in. If you go into the page and stuff, you should see like Patreon stuff underneath for those who are questioning that. And also, if you're looking for the timings, if you go into the Patreon page, it talks about the different timings and stuff that I have on, and the different stuff for the Patreon. Have no gawk, have no look at it. Judge the page and tell me it's absolutely terrible and shite if you want to. I've put a bit of time into it, like, so definitely give me a bit of criticism on how the Patreon page looks. Don't go in there with the whole idea of donating. Just go in for an old gawk and an old nosy on the Patreon and tell me what you think of the page. And I'm also doing classes on, if you're living in America and Britain, Sunday night, and if you're living in Australia like myself and Wayne, and also over in Okinawa like myself, they'll be on Monday morning if you want to jump in there for any of the classes and stuff. And also sadly Rachel, there was a bit of miscommunication and stuff with Rachel. She's over in an event over in Bangkok right now, so there was a bit of mad stuff going on and stuff, which is, it happens. It's happened to myself like numerous of times when I'm trying to go between historical events and what's happening online and stuff. So hopefully we have Rachel back. Obviously click over to the Creative Contessa's page and subscribe over to her page as well, and hopefully I'll be over on Rachel's page next week and seeing what the crack is, because we're very 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 busy this week going into February and stuff, because if you're unaware, TikTok has been banned in a lot of places, I think this month, and there's been massive changes that's happened in both YouTube and Twitch. So we'll try to make adjustments and changes to seeing what YouTube and stuff is up to. So there'll be massive changes happening to the YouTube page and stuff, so definitely pay attention to that. Other than that, guys, I think that's pretty much us for this weekend. I should be back hopefully over in Rachel's page next week. We'll see. We'll have another chat and see what's going on with YouTube and stuff, and we'll see what happens there. Clans, 1850, reflection. Oh, yeah. And then thanks for that. And for everybody as well that was chucking in the references and stuff and helping me out on stuff that I missed. Thanks very much on all that, guys. That's really appreciated. My autocorrect is, I'm literally, because I'm not always the best with spelling and grammar and stuff, I've been using the, let me give us a sec. What I normally do, oh, my thing is so slow, is I've been using the old chat GPT. I've downloaded that thing, and I normally just type out whatever I need, myself, and then I send it into the old fixed spelling and grammar. So yeah, when it comes down to the autocorrect, God, I have endless amount of problems with that myself. Any progress in getting your page monetized? That's in February 5th. I'll be applying for monetization. I don't even know why they cut my payment. They didn't even explain themselves properly, YouTube. And I'm not even the only one. Loads of medieval channels got cut for being too violent and stuff. Oh, I noticed that got cut straight away. That's quite funny. Yeah. So I think that's pretty much, I noticed YouTube took that one away. Huh. Big Brother's watching, huh? Anyway, that's enough of that. Thanks very much, lads. And as always, slán